Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to Autumn Amour. This is a BookTube event long in the making, created by the Bookish Bryants and designed to celebrate romance fiction. The Bookish Bryants are on a bit of a roll, doing all sorts of reading events that are genre-related. They chose romance for September, and we have a great group of co-hosts that I hope will indulge me in some live conversations. And you have done Autumn Amour if you have read one romance for September. Well, the goal is to read romance novels in September, and an unspoken goal, but one that I hope is true, is maybe for those of you who don't read romances, to have never read a romance, to maybe read one in the month of September, just to see. Open your mind and see what you would make of a romance novel. So that's all that you need to do this event, but we do have prompts and guidelines if you want. And the first week of Autumn Amour is historical or contemporary, because romance is a broad church. It covers everything. Science fiction, mystery, urban fantasy, historical fiction, very much so, escapist fiction, the gays, all that sort of stuff, all falls under the heading of romance novels. So for the first week, there's sort of this dichotomy. Will you read a historical and contemporary? Will you read only contemporaries, but you keep historicals in mind, or whatnot? My favorite romances to read are historical. They are Regency romances, which for some odd reason, the romance community has decided that the Regency period is extra captivating. It's this sort of bottled little wonderful world where romances can be set. I think the bottled part is crucial. There's a sub-element of romance novels that wants a self-contained world where the romances can happen. That you create a setting which, for one reason or another, the outside world is not going to interfere with too much. Now, part of that is just reading your audience correctly, because most readers who read romance novels are reading it for escapist fare. And you don't get any better escapist fare than to pull the reader into the world of your novel and literally close the door behind them so that it's a totally self-contained world. I believe that's why Highlander romances are inexplicably so popular, because the Highlands of Scotland and the weird ancient history of the Highlanders sort of seals off the world. I am 100% certain that is the appeal, for instance, of the otherwise inexplicable Amish romance subgenre. The Amish world is, in a way, sealed off from the real world that the reader lives in. Although quite a few Amish romances get their narrative energy from that real world either intruding or trying to intrude. But that I think that is one of the reasons for instance, the popularity of the Regency period, and that I love Regency romances more than any other kind of romance. But the romances that I want to talk about today are a different thing. I wanted to see if I could explicitly link contemporary and historical. I can't do that with Regency romances. Not really. There are a handful of modern romance novels starring the British gentry, the landed gentry, who are an indispensable part of Regency romances. There are some that do. I occasionally read a romance novel where the heroine is, plucky and working off student loans, or a single mother working in a bake shop, and she will meet a duke. He drives a car and he has a cell phone, and he makes a lot of money on Bitcoin or whatever, but he's a duke. But that's rare. That's much rarer than to situate that sort of thing in the past. So that kind of explicit connection is rarer. Okay. Oh, baby, that belch was loud enough to hear on camera. Oh, you were such a tomboy, little girl. Oh goodness. I am waiting for an apocalypse when it comes to Little Baby Bean that I am not looking forward to at all. Her standard greeting for dogs she's never met before is a fusillade of furious barking. She doesn't mean it. She's not aggressive. She wouldn't bite another dog even if that other dog were attacking her. It is merely vocalizing. It is merely a terrier thing. It is meant to let them know that she's there and that she sees them. That's all. It is what obnoxious 21st century dog trainers refer to as reactivity. And they work hard with their well-paying clients to iron it out of their dogs, whip it out of their dogs, muzzle it out of their dogs, food bribe it out of their dogs. We meet people on our dog walks all the time, routinely. I see dogs who have been brainwashed. They have been warped so that when they so much as see another dog, they look instantly to their owner for a treat. And the goal is for them to completely ignore the presence of another dog. That's the goal that food has caused here. You're going to walk on like a zombie. You're not even going to notice another dog. And the owners are always so proud. They're always so proud when their dog does that. When the dog looks at them for a treat, instead of reacting in any way to the presence of another dog. Every time I see the proud look on an owner's face like that, I can just imagine that a month or two before, they had a gender reveal party for their dog. It's always sad to me. I always walk away from those. I, of course, don't let Frida anywhere near brainwashed zombie dogs like that. But when I'm walking away, I always think the same thing over and over again, which is that I can't save them all. Those dogs are getting medical care. They are sheltered from the elements. They are getting food and water. It's true that their owners have worked with surgical precision to remove anything natural or happy from their lives. But at least they get to live. Plenty of dogs on Earth don't get to live or live in misery. But that's Frida's first reaction to new dogs, is a fusillade of excited barking. She doesn't mean it. She will walk up to them and get to know them. Not friendly. She's not unfriendly, but she's not friendly. She likes humans, not dogs. She thinks that most dogs are losers. She doesn't have any dog friends. Even the ones that she's relatively friendly with are not her friends. They're friendly with her. They love seeing her, but she just stands there like, what's the matter with you? She, up in Vermont, she became quasi-friendly with the Basset Hound Princess, who lived next door to the Richardsons. And the month just changed. September just started here, and we got a new neighbor, and that neighbor has a Basset Hound, a male Basset Hound named Spencer. And I met him. I, of course, went out and met him by myself. I went out and met him. I smooched with him. I rolled my fingers in his flab. I reminded myself over and over again of my Basset Hound, Lucy. And now I am dreading their first meeting because Frida's going to go nuts. She's going to yell at him. And I'm hoping that he takes it well so that they can become at least friendly enough so that I can face smooch with him every time we run across each other. I have no idea. Maybe his owner is one of those weirdos that has food bribed their dog into completely ignoring the presence of other dogs. Maybe they're one of those people. I never know. I can never tell. I make a point of keeping my mouth shut when I meet other dog walkers on our dog walks. I make a point of just smiling and nodding. A wise woman years ago told me, just smile and nod. Just the other night, we met a beautiful, beautiful dog whose owner had strapped a gigantic plastic muzzle across her nose, across her mouth. So they're out for a walk. Why would you even bother to take a dog for a walk if you're doing that? Imagine going for a walk yourself with a face mask like this. So it's not just one eye, it's half of your other eye too. If someone insisted you can go for as many scenic walks as you want in the neighborhood, but you have to wear a mask like that, would you bother? I squatted down and smooched with the dog, of course, and the owner was burbling the whole time. And at one point she said, yeah, she's got that big muzzle on. I'm hoping it comes off sometime soon. And I couldn't help myself. I said, I should hope so. Then I stopped because it's an ironclad rule. I cannot save them all. That dog with the horrific muzzle on, the torture device, is getting fed, is getting medical care, is getting shelter from the elements. Anyway, what was that? That digression was like 15 minutes. Oh, right. The bee got up and moved, and that was enough for me. So anyway, I was talking about romance 30 minutes ago, and I mentioned that the dichotomy here for the first prompt of Autumn Amour is the present-day romances and historical romances. And I thought, wouldn't it be interesting to draw a line between those? You could do that, for instance, with Highlanders. There are a couple of ongoing series of modern Highlander romances. How that would be done, I don't know. But I thought I would do it with Westerns. because that happens. That happens a lot. Now, the other day, I showed you a Western by Michelle MacLean. And it was the second book in a series, and I have now read the first. I read this morning the first book in the series, which is Hitched to the Gunslinger. And this has very similar basic plot outline to what was it? A Gunslinger's Guide to Not Getting Married or Staying Single, or whatever the title was of the one we talked about the other day. Very similar situation here. This time we have a legendary gunslinger, the fastest gun in the West, who wants to retire and is learning, much to his chagrin, that it's almost impossible to retire when your face is known everywhere, when everyone wants to make a reputation off you, when every law enforcement officer anywhere in the country wants to arrest you or shoot you dead. It's pretty tough to retire after you've made a name for yourself. I couldn't help but spare a thought there for a lot of social media influencers who are going to discover that in about 5 or 10 years. They're going to discover it's almost impossible to retire when you have made a name for yourself as a race-baiting huckster or someone who flings personal insults at anyone who disagrees with their opinions. Anyway, well, it's digression. It's a digression day, isn't it? Oh my! But anyway, this famous gunslinger, by the mazy way, ends up in the same location as the second book in the series that I read, Desolation, a small, intentionally hidden town called Desolation, where people go for second chances. They go to retire. They go to get away from the rest of the world. Again, the thing I was talking about, an attempt is made to bottle up the location. We mentioned before on this channel many times that one very popular subcategory of romances are location-based romances. A little bay in Northern California or a small town in the foothills of the Rocky Mountains. And there's a main street, and there's a park, and there are people, and there's one of the appeals of the location-based romance is that it bottles things up in a way that feels cozy, where you get to go in and pull the door closed behind you. Desolation is a perfect example of that. And once again, I shouldn't say once again, because this happens first, before the novel that I read second. Once again, our two characters are promptly married to each other without any say-so on their part. Seems to be a condition or a tradition in Desolation. And then the sparks fly, and I can report that this book was hilarious. Just like the second one. I am now a total fan of this author. Just genuinely funny. Lots of times romance novels will try to be funny, and the jokes don't land. They're labored. That's not true here, and it isn't true in the sequel to this. They're both funny. Genuinely funny books. So that was one of the ones that I read. And Tombstone is set nominally in the past. Many historical romances, including Regencies, have just stopped putting dates at the front of their book. It used to be that they all did. It used to be they would all say, 1814 or whatever. Now they don't tend to do that. As yet another reason to take it easy on the author in terms of the research. Let's do less research and make this just sort of a historical fantasy. And that fantasy element has become all the more pronounced since the success of the Bridgerton TV show, which has is shot right. It's fantastic, but it's shot right through with explicit fantasy. It might as well have dragons in it, and that is seeping back from the small screen to the books. So historical romances have tended to just leave the dates off, but nevertheless, the Desolation books are set in the days of horse-drawn carriages. There are no telephones. There are no TVs. There's nothing like that. It's obviously in the 19th century somewhere in ye olden times, and so is this one. That I read. Janet Kelly, this is A Cowboy Christmas, in which a rancher has all sorts of stuff to deal with, all sorts of crises. He doesn't ever dress like that. That's mainly for the cover. But on top of all that, he notices that he has a new cook at his main house, and she's our heroine, and he starts to fall in love with her because she's very much an individual. She is very, very standout in her individuality and has a whole bunch of the mechanisms of the plot revolving around her as well, including a terrific villain. One thing that's often missing from romance novels, or not missing, but poorly done, is the villain, the bad guy. It's almost a lot of romance authors, quite a few of them working today, don't believe you need a villain. the difficulty of falling in love, the true love never does run smooth, that sort of thing will be the obstacle, and that'll be enough of an obstacle. You won't really need a villain. Every once in a while, especially in contemporary romances, the author will try to throw in, a city slicker or a tech billionaire or something like that. It's usually not convincing. The villain in this book is convincing. Time was put into making this villain a bad guy, and I appreciate that. That can't help but increase the tension of the stakes towards the end when you think the bad guy might win, and it can't help but, as old-fashioned as this is of me to say, it can't help but increase the heroism of the hero. It was well done. I couldn't help but notice, though, that something that we're going to see. I'm going to do a triptych here of books. We're going to see here. There's a problem with this book that's sitting right there in the title. But I did enjoy it, and I know that this has at least one sequel that I now want to give a try. One of the fun things about reading romance, or actually any kind of genre, is that if an author does it all well, then they go on a kind of mental checklist. Oh, I like that author. And if it's a one-off, if this book, let's say this has 6 books in the series and all of them are bad except this one, well, then I'll learn that pretty quickly. But otherwise, I'll have another author to watch for. I definitely do with Michelle MacLean. I will not miss a new book about Michelle MacLean. Absolutely not. She's had two at-bats with me, and both have worked perfectly. But then the third book is contemporary. And this is by Caitlin Cruz, and it is Summer Nights with a Cowboy. And it's called a Kittredge Ranch novel, and stars the two main characters. The male main character is the square-jawed, immensely muscular, and very handsome town sheriff, who has an instinct, lots of instincts. He's very protective of his town. He's very protective, especially of the vulnerable people in his town. He's very much along the lines of the old-fashioned 1920s Irish beat cop he doesn't just walk his beat. He knows you. He puts his nose in your business, but not to be nosy, in order to protect you. Doesn't want anybody taking advantage of you, is very suspicious of outsiders when they come to town. And has, a ranch of his own, a property of his own that he's trying to work in addition to being the town sheriff. And there's a traveling nurse. There's a professional nurse named Janie who is, heroes tend to hog the spotlight in books like this. Either that or they're one-dimensional wooden figures. But the female main character in this book is terrific. Just terrific. Really, I hate to say this, I know that some romance authors and some romance readers may even know how I mean this, but Janie really did strike me as belonging in a different book. She didn't need to be as three-dimensional as she was to be in this book and make this book good. This book was very good. But she's something more. And you know that right from the beginning when she's saying, that I've always been everybody's best friend. I'm the bridesmaid. I'm one of the guys. I don't stick out. I'm reliable. Nobody notices me. And she's made her peace with that. She views it as an adjunct to being such a successful hospice nurse. Right? The last thing a patient in hospice care wants is a nurse who's a drama queen. She views it as kind of essential to that, and it is seeped into her whole view of herself. When she moves to town to take care of an elderly resident of town. The sheriff notices her right away. They have a meet-cute moment where she spills the entire contents of her Starbucks order on top of him and offers to take his shirt and clean it. And it sounds like she's saying, could I take your shirt now, in the crowded coffee shop? And he doesn't like her. Right from the beginning, he doesn't like her. And most cataclysmically of all, she triggers his instincts that she's lying. He tells her right away in their first meeting, I think it's in their first meeting, he tells her he has an infallible instinct for when people are lying to him. And that instinct is going, he doesn't quite say it, but that instinct is going off 4-alarm fire strong with her. Now, it turns out in the course of the first half of the book that he's actually right. She's attracted to him, and she's not telling him that. That could count as the thing that's triggering his instinct, but he thinks the worst. He thinks she's in town to take advantage, not only of her elderly patient, but of her elderly patient's best friend, who is a close friend of his. A relative of his. So the more he sees her on the surface, the more suspicious she seems to him, even though we are told in alternate narrative viewpoint chapters that really should have been left out. We should never be inside his head in the course of this book. It just doesn't work. But We nevertheless are, and we learn right away that she is definitely on his mind as well. uh, and it's the weird thing, the thing that, I mean, I'm not faulting Caitlin Cruz here. This is a terrific cowboy romance, a terrific modern Western romance. Really enjoyable. I loved it. Caitlin Cruz, for instance, has a narrative, an authorly tactic that not every author would feel confident enough to do. She will have dialogue going on between her, for instance, her two main characters, and then she will digress from the dialogue while it's still going on into the thoughts of either one of the two people or into the past of what informs their comments, and then very naturally loop back to the dialogue. So that you don't feel like you've missed anything at all. You don't. Absolutely don't. Some authors do that, and you when it loops back to the dialogue, you're saying, all right, what was this again? Who's talking? That never happens. And that's all up to the skill of the author. So this is terrifically good, but I kept thinking, I don't know. When the sheriff is suspecting Janie of some ulterior motive, saying, I don't know what you're doing here. I don't know why you're so interested in the history of this little town in the middle of nowhere. I don't know what you're doing with your elderly patient. But essentially, he tells her, I'm watching you. Be sure you know that I'm the law in this town and that you are on my radar and not in a good way. When she starts getting that attention, even though it's negative, it thrills her. Because it's directed specifically at her. Not at one of the guys. Not at the bridesmaid. Not at someone knitting in the background. She's in the foreground. She is the object, her specifically, of his attention. It just happens to be negative attention. That element, I mean, it's done well in this book, but I wanted more of it. Definitely more of it. Far less of the meet-cute moments, the spills, the trips, the double entendres, and far more of that. I guess what I'm trying to say here, again, I'm no criticism to Caitlin Cruz and no criticism to genre romance, but I felt there was a more weighty, a more nuanced, a more serious novel in here waiting to be unwrapped, and it doesn't happen. Because romance is formulaic. That's one of the main reasons that snobs dismiss it, is because it's formulaic. I always want to tell those people, if you don't think Cormac McCarthy is formulaic, allow me to walk you through any one of his books. But almost everything is formulaic. I'm thinking of a tiny handful of exceptions. A Naked Singularity by Sergio de la Pava, but not many books. Romances are unapologetically formulaic. And yet, ordinarily I don't care, but in this, I have no doubt that Caitlin Cruz could have written this book with a different title, at a different length, in a different way. Not all romances affect me that way. But I liked it. I liked it very much. So the trio of books that I read, that I'm talking about today for Autumn Amour, were all things that I liked. But these two, Summer Nights with the Cowboy, which it's a wrong title. Summer Nights with the Cowboy and A Cowboy's Christmas share a problem, which is that neither one of them is about cowboys. The cowboy in question here, once he buttons up in the middle of a snowstorm, is a rancher. And the cowboy in question here is a sheriff. Neither character, if you asked them, would call themselves a cowboy. At least the Hitched to the Gunslinger is correct. It is a gunslinger who's involved here. But the cowboys here, I've met cowboys in real life. I understand that it evokes a kind of romantic thrill, I guess, but they're very different when you meet them in real life. You have never met anyone who works a harder, more boring life than a real cowboy. They get up an hour or two before dawn. They work hard all day long. They have supper when the sun is still in the sky, and they are in bed at sunset. Except for the weekends, or if they can get a big enough crew so they can take time off, in which case it's usually not what it looks like in romance novels. It's usually not. We're talking about a huge amount of chewing tobacco, so that they basically are, have gums instead of teeth. And we're talking about an enormous amount of big screen, plasma TV, Xbox playing. It's weird. one or two times that I spent time with cowboys, especially in Montana, the word that came to my mind over and over again, including with a couple of groups of people who I didn't know each other, I just met them separately, was monastic. There are no monk romances, very few. The parents of Erasmus notwithstanding, there are very few monk romances. I understand that you want to slap that word on there, and maybe rancher or sheriff doesn't work as well, but it's just a minor nitpick. Neither of the characters in these books are cowboys, or would call themselves that. But of the three, Summer Nights with the Cowboy was still my favorite, even though I was yearning for it to be more than it was, which doesn't happen to me often with romance novels. And I wonder if you read it, if you'll think the same thing. I read it on as an ebook, even though I have the paperback. And the reason why is because the paperback is one of these weird... Look at this. I don't have small hands. I can't put my hand around this novel. It's one of these weird Kindle-shaped square paperbacks that I've tried reading these things. They're very incongenial. They don't fit in the palm in the way that... this is an iPad mini, but a Kindle will fit in the palm specifically because you are not expected to do the action of flipping pages. If you are, then it can't be this size. It has to be thinner than this. But anyway, I had it in paperback. I ended up reading the ebook anyway because it was more comfortable than reading a Kindle-sized paperback. So that's my Autumn Amour for today. It's a whole bunch of cowboys, a whole bunch of Western romances. Who knows where I'll go from here? Could be anywhere, historical or contemporary. That's the whole of the romance world. So I will check in with another batch of books next time. Thank you, BookTube.